Funding for This Is Nashville comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
I'm Khalil A. Kulona, and this is Nashville. The Sewanee Review was established in 1892, making it the oldest continuously published literary quarterly in the United States. The magazine's endurance means that it once published the works of people like Flannery O'Connor and William Faulkner. However, the Review fell out of prominence in the latter half of the 20th century, but under the leadership of Adam Ross, the Review has been revived. He's the author of 3 books, including the recently published Play World, A Child Actor, and is the editor of the Sewanee Review. I'd like to welcome Adam Ross to This Is Nashville. Adam, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Khalil. It's a thrill to be here.
Really great to have you. Okay, so talk to me about the history of the Sewanee Review. It was established more than 130 years ago. That's a long time. What's it known for?
Well, I think in more modern, recent literary history, it was the seat of new criticism. It really was, in the Alan Tate and Andrew Lytle years. Those are former editors. It was really the place where how criticism is done, close reading was really established, and the Review at that time really was more of a publisher of interpreting literature than let's say necessarily publishing as broad a set of genres as the literary magazine does today.
Interesting. Now, how has American literature, this is a really broad question, how has it changed since the early days of the Review?
That's a fantastic question. The way in which it's changed, and this was very much a part of my own both what I recognized coming in as an editor and my editorial philosophy was, when I was coming up as a writer, literature was what I like to call vertically organized, which is to say that there were these great artists, often white men, who transmitted literature downward. They were sort of like the gods of American lit. There were, of course, people of color and women, but these were the people who were transmitting literature. And, over the last 30 years, American literature has become what I like to call more horizontally integrated or polyphonic. And that's one of the beauties of American literature now is that, you are treated to this smorgasbord of voices. But when I took over the Review had ossified somewhat and hadn't opened its doors, as it were, to those voices.
You stepped in 2016.
That's correct.
To become the editor.
Yes.
How did you approach breathing life into this magazine, taking this horizontal view of where the industry and the craft, let's call it, is now?
Well, the funny thing about it was on a certain level just a process of opening its doors to the writers I was surrounded by, which is to say, I came in as an author. I was a novelist, and my first book came out in 2010, and I was one of the great pleasures of being an author is the chance to get to meet your heroes, and so you're out there in America meeting all these people you've been reading forever and who comprise American literature of the moment. Mm-hmm. And you end up having a kind of secret handshake with them. And that secret handshake is simply you've finished a book. You've done the hard thing. And so over the course of those several years before I was appointed as editor, I had this broad network. And it was a broad network both through my publisher. It was a broad network through people I had met. It was a broad network through friends who were teachers in MFA programs all over. So unwittingly, Khalil, I had this Rolodex. Mm-hmm. I had this gigantic Rolodex. And part of the job of the Review, or what I saw as my job as the editor, was to not only tap that Rolodex, but to then plug the Review into the broader American literary culture, even by, plugging it into the New York literary scene, making contacts with agents in New York. You're establishing tranches of submissions. Mm-hmm. You're establishing different portals through which people can send their work to the review. So to give you an example, when I took over the Sewanee Review, we only got 800 submissions a year, and now we get 8,000.
Wow!
And invariably, right, by setting up that network and then also getting acclaim, getting visibility, launching young writers, more and more young writers and more established writers want to be in the review, or they conjure with the review as a place to publish work that's, say, longer form that they might not be able to publish elsewhere.
Did you intentionally decide to find different types of writers, different voices when you took over?
Well, you had to. You had to because that's what American literature was. So, for instance, one of the initial stats that I was most proud of was that, in my first year, more than 50% of the writers in the review were women. And that was one of the imbalances. And again, it's not a quota thing at all. What it is it just reflects the world, the literary world as it was. So yeah, it was absolutely intentional. But the funny thing was, and I recognized this coming in, is that it was kind of easy. And when I say it was easy, I meant that, people in the literary community certainly knew of the review's reputation and knew that it was at one time one of the preeminent literary magazines in the country. And so when you do certain things, like, when I came in, I immediately had Peter, for years and years, it was just this blue cover. And we had it redesigned so that it would have shelf appeal. And we were really fortunate to get like a big story in the New York Times about my editorship. And so that attention made it easier and easier. It lubricated things in order of getting a wider variety of voices in the magazine.
I want to get back to the review, but you said something. Okay, in your opinion, you've been an author for going on 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Where do you think American literature is at currently?
I think American literature right now is its most diverse and most representative of the country's direction. I mean, I think that literary fiction is. So I mean, I think of this as a golden era in American literature, because you could pick so many different authors from so many different backgrounds, and you would understand American literature. You would understand America from so many different angles, whether it's Kanak Kapur, who's going to be on the show later, or writers like Katie Kitamura or Lisa Taddeo, or more established writers like Michael Cunningham or Brandon Taylor. I mean, America is American literature is broader than it's ever been.
Yeah, we're getting close to a decade since you took over.
Yes.
How does it look different today?
Well, the magazine literally looks different in that, we got two of the best book designers in America, as I said, to redesign it. The magazine operates differently, and that's a paywall protected magazine that has both a digital and print presence. But then we also, we have a podcast, and it was a podcast that was really started by one of my young editors. She had the idea for starting the podcast. And so, in some ways, to me, what the review is the review is this very small publishing engine, a media engine on top of a mountain in Middle Tennessee. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have other editors from other publications and quarterlies reaching out to you to ask, hey, Adam, how did you spit new life into the Sewanee Review?
We did. I sort of don't want to name names, but in certain, several editors came to us and asked, talk to us about how you did what you did. And of course, there's a high degree of luck in these things, like the capture of attention that a revivification of a magazine would get. But at the same time, I'm more than. What I'm thrilled about is there's a real collegiality and sense of community among other lit mag editors. So, I've regularly been in conversation with Megan O'Rourke at the Yale Review. I've regularly been in conversation with Laurie Dorr, who's the publisher at Paris Review, because we exchange ideas, because in a weird way, we're not in competition. Mm-hmm. We are an ecosystem. We're a community. And I think it is one of the things that's really beautiful about literary magazines, which is you're making a quarterly mixtape, like every 4 times a year, you're delivering this incredible mixtape about what American literature is right now, right? But it's an ecosystem, and it's a way in which you're creating a sense of community. You're hearing voices that you might not hear otherwise.
Now, you mentioned that the Review is this really wonderful jewel on top of a mountain.
Yes.
And Sewanee, Tennessee is a very small mountain town. Population of around 3,000, if I'm familiar. But it's also the home of Sewanee, the University of the South.
Yes.
Talk to me about the historical connection between the university, the community, and the Review.
Well, I would say that I think the Sewanee Review is literally in the stained glass of All Saints Chapel, the founding of the Review by William Peterfield Trent, right? So I think the university sees literature and the literary life as integral to. I mean, it's in its very DNA. What I have really tried to do as an editor has been to be regional. So, for instance, every year we give out the Aiken Taylor Award, this major poetry award, to a major poet, and we make sure that poet appears at Sewanee St. Andrew's School. We do what we call a Red Rug series, where we bring in writers to read to the students, to appear before the students. We make sure that our presence is such that the students at the University of the South are getting a front row seat to what the life of a literary person is, what a life in letters is about, because it's a liberal arts education.
Yeah.
And I actually think in the coming age of AI, it's going to be the liberal artists who are the most important generalists on the planet, because they're going to remind us of what it means to be human.
Now, are you tapping this young talent to come work for the Review once they graduate? It's the
thing that I'm most proud of, because one of the things I recognized when I came on was that I would have a terrible staffing problem because of the remoteness of Sewanee. And so you have this fantastic English department at Sewanee who trains just these remarkable young people in a traditional literary education. And so what my managing editor and I have to do is we have to give them a crash course. It's a very small staff, a crash course in how to be editors, podcasters, bloggers, to use an old term of art. And so we don't have enough staff to not where somebody doesn't do anything. They handle our web migration. They handle all our social media. We just got 10,000 followers on Instagram, and that's due to them, because I'm not. I mean, part of what I have to do is be in collaboration with young people. That is part and parcel of revivifying a publication, which is also, to my earlier descriptor, it's polyphonic. Like, you have to be in conversation with these young people, because if it's only about what you decide, then there's a good chance you're missing something.
Yeah, and you're opening it up to different generations, different points of view.
Absolutely,
and it's truly encompassing of what American literature is.
Absolutely, because they're going to hear things you won't. And they're going to have their own front row seat to living lives that you don't. And so I do think that the duty of a good editor is to be radically open, radically open both to the literature that comes across your desk and radically open to the conversation you're having with your staff, because they see things that you don't.
Now, I want to talk about your career. You're the editor, but you're also a writer, published 3 books, including the novel Playworld, which came out this year, to some really nice reviews. Congratulations on that. Thank you very much. How do you balance that role as a writer and an editor? And what's many, to me, what you just described is with, let's say, a companion type of mentor as well.
I wake up really early in the morning. I wake up really early in the morning. I mean, I am a morning writer guy, and it's funny. It's funny when you ask that question, because how do you balance it? You balance it with a lot of energy. You balance it with a lot of discipline. But the other thing I will say, which is a relief, and it's why I do love my job so much as an editor, is that, if you have a bad morning writing, you get to put on your editor's hat and participate in a very productive way in American literature. And so that's a wonderful relief. And when I say it's a wonderful relief, I don't just mean it's like, ooh, that was a bad morning. Like, I can forget about that. It's like, oof, that was a bad morning. I can go in and have some perspective and edit things and see good things. And it reminds me of why I'm doing this in the first place. And it reminds me of what great writing is. And that also has a real stimulating effect when you go back to your own work and your own page.
Well, what is great writing? And, I've had novels handed to me where someone says, this is absolutely brilliant, and it wasn't for me. I know we have our own individual tastes. And the reverse has happened as well. To you, base definition, what is great writing?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because part of teaching my young staff was coming up with a criteria of great writing, so that we have three. One is stickiness, because we needed a set of terms to train young people. One is stickiness. Does the story you're reading or novel excerpt you're reading or essay internally cohere? But even more importantly, does it stay with you for days after? Mm-hmm. Does it stick with you? The other is, does it bring news? The great modernist William Gaddis used to say, bring me the news. Does it newly mint an experience or a situation? And then finally, the last one is authority. And authority is like, if you're writing about unicorns, you need in the writing of something to show that you know everything about unicorns, horn to hooves. Mm-hmm. And that's shot through in the writing. And so that's how we describe the experience of reading something great. But of course it's subjective. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the beauty of a literary magazine, again, going back to that sort of mixtape idea, is that, and this is about also community, I think, because the mixtape idea is not everything in the review may be for you, but if you are a subscriber, and shameless plug, www.thesewaneereview.com, please subscribe. If you are a subscriber, I think you end up having a relationship with the editor and the editors, because if something's in the review, if it's made it into the review, there's trust there. Mm-hmm. You're like, I should read that, this poem may not initially appeal to me, but I trust that the quality of this magazine is such that there's a reason they selected this. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I think this gets misconstrued as gatekeeping. It's not gatekeeping. It is the affirmation of taste, but it's conducted in a way that is, the conversation my staff and I have about literature is, I'd like to think, conducted as authentically and openly and with the highest degree of integrity as possible.
All right, so I'm going to go to break in a few minutes. We're going to bring on the writer who you published in the review, Kanak Kapur. Her story, Long Sleeves, it appeared in the spring 2024 edition. You receive 8,000 submissions a year. What stood out about Kanak's story?
So the thing that stood out about Kanak's story is that, well, first of all, just the energy on the level of her sentences, just the life that is shot through her sentences. It's about two young women coming of age in Dubai, coming into their sexuality, coming into their womanhood. And it brought news in the sense that it talked about coming of age, which is, of course, as time-worn a theme as there is. But it set it in a place where you saw how certain universal experiences are figured forth in a place you may not know a great deal about. Mm. And that was fascinating. It's sticky because just the way in which Kanak describes Dubai, newly mints it. And so there's a way in which all the experiences, Khalil, are always the same. And it's kind of like this, because you read so many things. Mm-hmm. You read lots of competent things, lots of things that are quote unquote good. And good can be oppressive. Like because you read a lot of good stuff and you're like, it's like The Incredibles. It's like, if everyone's incredible, nobody's incredible. Yeah. But then what happens is something like Kanak's piece comes across your desk and you forget you're reading a submission. You're just transported, you're enchanted. And so what you have to do as an editor, and what we do as a staff, is we trust that that experience is transferable to our readers. So it's kind of like, you know what it's like? It's like paying attention to pleasure. It's like that. So to me, it's not some kind of like objective measure. It's like really trusting your own sense of pleasure and really believing that when you hand that off to the next to your readers, they'll be like, oh yeah, that was really something.
It's kind of like what the late, great Quincy Jones said about music as an artist. If you're working on a song and you like it, it's guaranteed that someone else is going to
exactly
work with that as well. Okay, final question for you. I have to ask this. Two things. One, have you ever submitted anything to the review yourself as a writer? And another one, are you an analog or digital reader? Do you want a book with pages or a Kindle?
I did submit something to the review. Years and years ago, I just got a form letter of rejection. I think when the Times wrote about us, it made it sound like I was enraged by it. I wasn't. I mean, I got plenty of rejections in my life, but I am absolutely analog. I need a book and I need a pen, and it will always be thus. I like the thinginess of the book itself. I think any writer worth anything is a bibliophile.
Adam Ross is the editor of the Sewanee Review and the author of 3 novels, including Playland. Adam, again, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be joined by Kanak Kapur. She is a writer and a Vanderbilt MFA grad who was published in the Review last year. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP, and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Kulona, and this is Nashville. Welcome back to the show. Today, we're talking about the Sewanee Review, a prominent literary magazine based right here in Tennessee. We're now joined by Kanak Kapur. She's a writer who's published work in the Sewanee Review and recently the New Yorker. She's lived in Nashville for 3 years while attending Vanderbilt's MFA program. I'd like to welcome Kanak Kapur to This is Nashville. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Really, really great to have you. Okay, so Adam just described your story, Long Sleeves, as something that immediately, as soon as you start reading it, you are transported into this world. Tell me a bit about the story and what inspired it.
Oh my gosh. Well, Adam was too kind, but it's a story about 2 teenagers living in Dubai, and they're best friends and they're sometimes lovers. And they go to a party which forever alters their relationship with each other. And I'd been trying to write this story for a long time. I think I wrote a first draft when I was in college, and it was a terrible draft. It immediately went into the garbage bin. But there was something about the relationship between these 2 girls, and I had this image of them in a cab together that was just haunting me, and it just stayed with me through the years. And I was in an MFA workshop, and in a workshop you have to constantly write and produce work to bring to workshop. So the deadline is often quite helpful where production is concerned. And it was my last workshop of the semester, and I remember thinking, what do I have? What do I have that I haven't used yet, that I haven't dug and scraped everything out of yet? And I remembered this vision of the girls in the cab, so I just went back and started again.
And it turned into this. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, you lived for a minute in Dubai, right?
Yeah, for about 11 years.
Did you use that experience to help you in this piece?
Of course. I think the one true thing from this piece is that apartment building where the party takes place. It takes place in this high rise, which is all glass. There's these big glass windows, and it's this very fancy, shiny apartment building. And I did go to a party in that apartment building, and it wasn't nearly as sexy or salacious as it is in the story. But I do remember the beautiful apartment.
That's something. Okay, so have you always wanted to be a writer?
Yes. But I have had to spend a lot of time convincing my parents that this was not something to be concerned about. It's going to be a lifelong endeavor, actually.
Yes. Yeah. They still need some convincing.
Oh, yeah. Every day.
Yeah. That's how loving parents are. So tell me this. When you learned that your piece was accepted to the review, do you remember how you reacted?
Oh, my God. Yes. The yeses that come from magazines are so far and few in between that each one feels like God shining his light on you. So I remember clearly I was actually house sitting for Major Jackson, who is a professor in the Vanderbilt program. And
you've had him on the show.
Yeah. And his little dog, who is really anxious and really cute, Finn, was following me from room to room. And I got the email from Adam, and I just exploded with joy and freaked Finn out, and then had to sort of calm his barking down before I could go on and text my friends.
Call your folks, and you're like, see, this is part of the process. Okay, so talk to me about, you got the acceptance. What is the editing process like? Is it hard or difficult? Because look, coming into news and journalism, I got to understand that's one form of editing. But this is editing prose in literature is totally a different beast in itself. What's that like?
Oh my gosh. Well, so emerging writers don't get to interact with editors that often. When we do, it's when we have something accepted at a journal, right? Which is rare. So it is a very collaborative process, and emerging writers are often working with editors who have so much more experience. They've been in the field for a longer time. They're often much older. They've worked before with writers who, to me, would be instructors and teachers and just people I really respect. And so it's this, it's kind of this awestruck, sort of strange collaborative experience where you have to sometimes fight for the things you want to keep in the piece, but also you're seeing how in each draft the sentences are better and the sort of fuzzy things have been straightened out. And it's kind of a transformative project. It almost feels like when you submit a story, it's a little stagnated and it feels not necessarily dead, but dormant to the writer. You've taken it as far as you can, but in the editing process, it comes alive again.
What was it like to edit? Well, how did that experience help you with the New Yorker edit once you got selected for that publication?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's a very similar process. You do about 2 big drafts where you cut things and rearrange things. And then you go into line edits, which are like making the sentences better. But it really prepared me. I think when I was accepted at the Sewanee Review, I felt very sort of wide-eyed and young, and I wasn't sure how to navigate this editor-writer relationship. But having done it once, I felt a lot more comfortable with the New Yorker.
Now, I've heard that you use the piece from Sewanee as your application process to other publications, right?
For other jobs and teaching jobs and things like that. It's my show pony piece that I use for everything. Yeah.
Well done. Okay, so answer this for me. From your experience as a writer a little bit more broadly, what is the importance of having literary magazines, a literary magazine like the Sewanee Review?
Oh my gosh. Well, for writers, the validation, we say it should come from inside, but when you're young and you're just starting out, it really does come from the outside. So just the possibility of being published in a journal sometimes feels exciting enough that, you can return to that dead piece or that piece that's not working anymore. And more widely as a reader, how wonderful that we have an artifact you can turn to and read other contemporary voices, people just like you, writing from often all over the world. I think literary magazines are like this beautiful, like, cultural artifact of our society that we need to protect at all costs.
Do you think it's special that this cultural artifact has found a home here in Tennessee?
Yeah. Nashville has this amazing, bustling literary community that I don't think a lot of people know about. We have Parnassus here, and Patchett lives here. We have this wonderful MFA program at Vanderbilt. We have the Sewanee Review, the Sewanee Writers Conference. I mean, the list goes on. And the Sewanee Review, I think, is really like helping to put Nashville on that literary map. Like, this is a possible haven for artists and writers.
What are you working on these days? A novel?
I'm working on a novel, or the novel is working on me.
Is that how it is often?
Yes.
It's just like it's coming through you one way or another. It can be pleasure or painful, right?
Yes. We have days of both.
Can you give us a slight idea of what it's about?
Yes. It's about a young woman who reunites with her childhood nanny in Mumbai for a few days. And it's set in 2014, shortly after the election. And yeah, it's about women and their feelings. And I'll leave it there.
Okay. We cannot wait to read this. I want to thank you so much for being here. Kanak Kapur is an emerging writer who has published work with the Sewanee Review and the New Yorker. Kanak, again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really a pleasure. All right, we're taking one last break. When we come back, we'll be joined by the Sewanee Review's junior editorial staff, who'll be reading selections of pieces published in the magazine. Stick around because you really don't want to miss this. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil A. Kulona, and this is Nashville. This hour, we've been discussing the literary magazine, the Sewanee Review. The Review publishes a breadth of work, ranging from poetry to short fiction to braided essays. Today, we've got the Review's junior editorial staff joining us to read selections of recently published pieces. Luke Gair, Brighid Griffin, and Kate Bailey are all graduates of Sewanee, the University of the South, who now make up the Review's junior editorial team. I want to thank you all for being here. Welcome to This is Nashville, guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Really appreciate this. Okay, listeners, you're in for a treat. They have selected a few pieces to share with us today. We're going to kick it off with Luke. He's going to read one of two poems by Vivi Francis. Luke, before you start us off, tell us what we're about to hear and why you chose it.
So this poem was written by the winner of the Aiken Taylor Award for Modern American Poetry. Vivi Francis is a professor at Dartmouth. She has been working for decades, and she was the first writer that I had met at the Review in a professional capacity. So selfishly, I had picked these poems just because I really look up to her as a lodestar in what I think American letters is and can be. So her work is interested in like the obliterating violent force of nature and the way that humans might complicate or perhaps even be a part of that. And I think in her work, she's always putting a finger on the bleeding line that separates like faith and just human nature. And are those the same things? What differentiates them? Oh,
wow. I really can't wait to hear what you're about to read. Which one are you going to share with us first?
So this poem is called Why I Don't Wait, and it's from our spring 2022 issue.
Okay.
Why I don't wait. Because I used to, and now the years have gone by, and some of them without me. And my passions have drifted or heightened. In either way, they have my attention. Because there are some who don't mind and will meet me where I am. And those who simply like the right now, no matter what the right now holds, and there is danger in going back, remember? And what is there ahead if our feet slip now because we refuse to see where we stand? Look, there is a summer cottage where a couple sleeps without food, stolen shelter, and there is an old man who won't see his family again and can't recall their faces, not because his mind won't let him, but because he refused to see his family, and now can't. So many cruelties in the now. And if we lose this moment, we lose our balance, the promise inherent in the well-worn waking hours.
Wow. That's something that kind of makes me feel like COVID, the pandemic shut down a little bit.
And I think to have Ivy come to Sewanee the fall after we were sent home, because summer of graduating online and going to class online, and to go long on this poet's body of work, and then to be sitting in front of her and to hear her read it was, I think, something close to communion. And I think in her work, it's sometimes you think about like, what is a prayer? And I think in her work, when you read it and when you listen to it and you spend time with it, it's something. I think about that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Okay, now, Brighid, you're going to be reading a selection of Till It and Keep It by Carrie R. Moore. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. Till It and Keep It by Carrie R. Moore came across our desk as a staff together in a direct submits meeting, which is kind of where we discuss a piece at length and whether or not we think it works for the magazine. And I was immediately struck by not only what a beautiful and carefully crafted world Carrie Moore was able to create with the dystopian landscape of this kind of climate fiction, post-apocalypse vibes, but also just she was so adept at describing the human condition and the ways that different humans can feel different types of loneliness and the different ways that that can impact us and our relationships. And I just felt like she had such a strong grasp of the human experience.
Mm-hmm. All right, take it away.
Yeah. In the beginning, there was her sister's breathing, which meant neither of them had died. It was faint, a slip of a sound in the truck's stillness, but it reached into the front seats and nudged Bree awake. She lay over the console, an ache in her ribs, sweat on her eyelids. Against her wrist, morning light fell in a thin orange beam. So she could see colors again, which meant the illness was fading. She'd been smart to pull off the road. Sometimes rest was all you needed. "Harper," she said, "wake up. We're still a long ways out." Her sister's breathing quieted. Bree felt behind her, arms weak, neck too stiff to turn. If she could just touch Harper, surely she'd wake too. This was hardly the worst they'd been through. Unlucky as they were, born into prolonged summers and floods rushing deep into the coast and dwindling federal relief. There was the land they'd worked in low America for years, the trees more branch than fruit. The miles of brown fields after they'd fled Randall's farm, and the masses of white tents clustered outside silver cities and along freeway exits. On more than one occasion, thin-hipped walking men eyed their trucks as it sped past, but who knew if they carried viruses or meant them harm? Any kindness had to be carefully doled out. When the sisters had long passed the health inspection at the Arkansas line, they stood in a shallow creek while Bree shaved Harper's deep honey curls. The green city lights wavering in the distance made Harper's hair shudder on the water's surface. "I don't care what it looks like," Harper had said, gripping Bree's elbow, "just so I don't feel his hands in it." "I got you," Bree murmured, tying a wrap, red as caul, over her handiwork. "It'll look good." She finished just before the outage drowned them in darkness. In the truck, Bree finally twisted to glimpse Harper in the space between the passenger seat and door. The wrap fell over her sister's cheek, flattened against the back seat. Who knew anymore how a virus would go? Some filled your lungs with fluid and made your muscles go liquid for weeks. Others made your skin ache, even in moonlight. This one had made Harper break out in hives once they were well into Tennessee, then start asking why the sun looked brown as the trees. As she drove, Bree said, "Just hang on, we'll stop soon," and passed her sister a silver canister of tea leaves to chew. But whatever was ailing Harper hit Bree, too. As the hot pressure spread through her skull, she eased off the road into woods blurry as gray flames. She cussed, then prayed, "Lord, cover us." It was different from her usual prayer. "Lord, let us get the chance to taste something green." Bree repeated her sister's name. They hadn't survived so much for her to lose Harper now. Then she saw the orange and green shapes just outside the window. The orange globes dimpled and striped pink, green, a sharp tip. It took her a minute to recognize them, long as it had been since she'd seen such fruit. "Harper," she said, "there's peaches out there." As if he'd heard, a man appeared at the window, the peaches vanishing behind his brown face. He opened the door, cool air rushing in. Then he lifted her against him, and her whole body split with pain. Her neck couldn't hold her head, which tipped over his arm. "God Almighty," he said, "there's two of you." She sank her teeth into his shoulder, held tight until she felt his skin break. He cussed. She felt him grip her thighs, trying not to drop her. Then his grip was gone, and so was everything else.
Wow. Wow. That is remarkable.
Yeah.
I don't know where to take that. I was reading this last night, and the first thought was, it was also late at night when I read this, and I was thinking zombies. But it's like, I don't know, but that is absolutely beautiful. Okay, Kate, we're going to get to you because I have a little bit of time left. We have enough time for you to get your piece in. Please, will you tell us what you're reading and a brief summary of why?
Absolutely. So this story is called Mongo 2 by Daniela Garvu. And Garvu is more of a new writer on the scene. She has an excerpt for her upcoming novel coming out in our next issue. And this story just really stuck out to me from the winter issue. It if we talk about stickiness, then I think it's one of those stories that really exemplifies how weird the review can be and how it can kind of, these stories can like lean into really absurd premises. And with that, I guess I'll just say that this story, I'll be reading from a little bit later into the story. It's about a man named BG who works as an orderly at a hospital. He works alongside a nurse named Jackie, who he has a bit of a crush on. And in order to impress Jackie, he decides to get to the bottom of this sort of mystery running throughout the story, which is what happened to one of the dogs of a patient in the hospital.
Okay.
And I'll just start reading. With my back to the barbed wire, I could watch little people wending across the hills, their dark heads bowed, necks pink against their coats. The dirt paths branched and conjoined, and people stuck to them without deviating. They looked down. No one saw me. I raised my arms over my head like an orchestra conductor and remembered the CAFO I worked at outside Billings, where pigs followed a winding steel maze to the killing floor. How hot it was among all that steel and flesh. Up here, the land felt wild and cold. Somewhere out there were coyotes trotting a ridgeline in single file. For a long time, I stood with my arms outstretched, absolutely still. After my walk, I felt maybe I should drop by the patient's house, after all, and check on the dog. Mostly, I had nothing else to do, and I had this idea that the dog, if there was a dog, might be roaming loose on the street, and if I scooped it up, I'd score major points with Jackie, who had a soft side. Also, since I'd gotten sober, I've been pulling the craziest stunts. Once you take out the alcohol, you still have to deal with the ism, so says my sponsor and every old tweaker in the Friday night basement. So I told myself I was just going to drive past and check. But by the time I found the grubby yellow house with the peaked attic and the chain link yard so beat down by heat and frost and chew toys, there was no grass left, and also no dog in sight. I figured I had to knock. The patient's mom answered in her winter coat, so I knew there was no heat in the house. She looked scared. I said, "Hi, Mrs. I'm sorry to intrude, but I'm a resident with the Providence Health Services assigned to caring for your daughter. I was wondering if I could collect a few of her personal belongings. We are trying to establish a baseline comfort level before we begin testing for mood disorders or possible psychotic conditions. That often yields more accurate results. And by the way, how are you feeling after your ordeal?" It was a trick I learned on the show House. He's always sending his residents into patients' homes and going through their medicine cabinets. When that doesn't bring any answers, they notice a leaky pipe and realize the patient has mercury exposure or radon poisoning or something. I figured I could at least find a dog. Besides, I have some experience talking older ladies into letting me into their homes.
Okay, what was that experience about is what I'm asking. Wow. That's something else. Okay, these are really wonderful pieces that you all shared with us. I do want to ask you guys a little bit. This submission process, right? When you guys have this entire editorial staff, and Adam was talking about it earlier, we were talking before the show, sometimes you guys will like something, and he's like, no, it's not for me, and vice versa. How do you all work through deciding what ends up in the final review, knowing that there's a difference of taste, there's a difference of a generational difference as to what really reaches out, and it feels to me that you all are looking and seeking different voices that appeal to you, that have that stickiness there. What is that process like for you guys?
Honestly, I think for the most part, it's kind of fun. It's really enlightening to read a piece and feel a certain way about it, whether that's you love it or you think, oh, this is garbage. And then to go into a meeting and hear someone so passionately defend the opposite, it kind of opens up your editorial mind to like not only the things that you might have missed, but the ways that certain pieces aren't for you. It helps you kind of, at least for me, it helps me to take my personal tastes out of the critique of what a good piece is.
Adam had talked through the 3 bits of criteria, authority, stickiness, and news at the magazine. And I think for that reason, we're going into these meetings to have a conversation, not about what we like and what we dislike, but more so speaking to the particular qualities of a work. And I think all of that really amounts to trust, both the trust that, the 3 of us have in each other, but also the trust that we have in Adam and our fabulous managing editor, Eric Smith, to make calls. And sometimes it's not really a gap in taste or quality, but more so just a question of like experience, how much you've read and how long you've been in the game and what you've seen work and what you've seen not work.
Okay.
For sure. I feel like on the other side of that though, like if you're extremely passionate about a piece, even as like a very young person entering this field, like they are so open to us, like really going up to bat for something that we think is just like really stand out or has something new to say.
Are you all aspiring writers yourselves?
That's
somewhat.
a fabulous question.
All in varying ways, yes.
So how is this helping you, having this job, reading these pieces, working with these, very seasoned writers and editors? How's that helping you with your own creativity in writing?
Well, we're all English graduates, and this is like a second education, like absolutely. Like within the first month of being at this job, it's like I had a whole new lens through which to view literature, and one that was much more applicable to, my hand holding the pen. Yeah, what do you guys think?
I think for me, something that I often say about this job and what it's taught me is that being able to be objective with someone else's work and pick out the points that are successful and the points that fail and the sentences that are weak and the sentences that are strong, it really helps me to be more objective with my own work. I find it easier then to stop like getting in my own way of, oh, but I like this paragraph, and really read it more from an editorial point of view and see why it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
I think cutting your teeth editorially, spending your time reading and editing the work of other people, reading advanced review copies, that's all like still amounting to the job of a writer, which is to like pay attention and to be cognizant of like whatever work it is you're sifting through, whether that's like line edits or you're learning how to tell a writer no about a short story. Like it's all part of the larger made thing, I think, that is just like making a life in the arts. And I know that sounds really grandiose, and I guess it's kind of is, but it's like I think like the pen does not necessarily need to be touching the paper in order to say that like you're doing the good work of writing, because you're still working toward a thing. And I think especially in our 20s, we have like at least I'd like to think the currency of youth to say like, well, still like, I'm practicing, I'm learning how to run long distance. I'm training the muscle group so that, I don't know, maybe a novel, who knows?
This job is giving you more than a paycheck.
Very true.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a moral education more than anything to have these considerations of both like utility and purpose when it comes to art making. It's easy to think about the job as an editor as like manning the turnstile to say like you're in and you're out, but it's you're doing something really remarkable and curating this greater ecosystem of writers, and I don't know, feels like I'm getting away with something, to be honest.
Well, thank you for getting away with it, and thank you for sharing it with us. Really appreciate you all being here. Luke Gair, Brighid Griffin, and Kate Bailey are a part of the junior editorial team at the Sewanee Review. Again, thanks to you all for being here, and good luck in your own literary careers. Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. We're going to take no more breaks. We're over. Thank you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Miss Cynthia Abrams. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation does not end here. Comment and tell us what you want to hear on the show by leaving us a message. 615-751-2500. You can also find us on the socials, Blue Sky, Instagram, and X at This Is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Kaliole Colonna. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody, and be good to each other.